The little girl said, "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." And let me tell you, the way her tiny voice cracked right there in that freezing morning air could have stopped anybody in their tracks, even a man who claimed he didn't have time for anybody's problems. The snow was falling sideways, the kind that stings your cheeks and makes the whole world look like somebody shook a snow globe too hard. And there she stood, 6, maybe 7 years old, boots soaked through, hugging this faded purple backpack like it carried the last bit of warmth she had left. The CEO, Daniel Brooks, had one hand on his car door, briefcase under his arm, Bluetooth in his ear, already halfway into a call about quarterly numbers in store, expansions and all, the things that made him feel important. But the second he actually heard her, not just the words, but the way they trembled out of her chest, he froze like the cold finally caught up to him. He slowly lowered his phone, staring at her like he wasn't sure if he should kneel down or back up. This wasn't his world. He dealt with spreadsheets, not scared kids in the snow. "Sweetheart, what did you just say?" he asked, his voice softer, like he wasn't used to speaking that way but was trying it out for the first time. And she wiped her face on her sleeve, tiny shaking hand, chapped knuckles, and whispered again, "My mom didn't come home. No drama, no big explosion of tears, just that quiet little sentence that hits you harder because she'd clearly run out of energy to cry about it anymore." Daniel glanced around the street. Townhouses lined up in a neat row, porches covered in white, the kind of neighborhood where folks usually kept their heads down and minded their own business. But the girl, Mia, she lifted her chin and pointed toward the empty road. "She volunteers at the food pantry on Maple Street. She said she'd be home before bedtime. She didn't come back." Daniel felt his stomach drop in a way he hadn't felt for years. Maybe it was guilt, maybe responsibility, maybe something he didn't have a name for yet, but it made him step closer. Her breath puffed out in cold clouds, her nose red, her eyes glassy like she was just trying not to pass out. "Where's your dad?" he asked gently. She shook her head. No dad in the picture. No neighbors awake. Nobody else she trusted. Just this stranger in a long black coat who happened to own half the grocery stores in the county, the kind of man she should have been scared of approaching. But desperation pushes kids to do things they normally wouldn't. Daniel swallowed hard, looking down the long, empty street like the answer might magically appear if he stared long enough. But nothing moved. No headlights. No footprints except hers. And he knew, deep in the place, he usually kept boarded up, that walking away now would haunt him. He sighed, tucked his phone into his pocket, and said, "All right, kiddo, show me where she works." And just like that, he stepped out of the life he knew and into hers. Mia took his hand, not because she trusted him fully, but because she had no other option, and led him through the snow-covered sidewalk, her tiny boots leaving shallow prints beside his deep ones. The sky hadn't even turned blue yet. It was that grayish morning haze where streetlights flicker like they're not sure if they should keep shining or finally give up. Daniel kept glancing down at her, noticing things he'd normally overlook. How she tried to walk fast despite her shivering legs. How she kept checking behind them like she hoped. Her mom would suddenly appear calling her name. How she winced every time the cold wind slapped across her face. "You should have been inside where it's warm," he muttered, more to himself than her. And she shrugged in that sad little way only kids who've seen too much shrug. Like comfort was a luxury, not something they expected. As they walked, he noticed how empty the neighborhood felt. No dogs barking, no cars scraping ice off windshields, no smell of fresh coffee from open windows. Just stillness and the crunch of their footsteps swallowing every sound. "How long have you been outside?" he asked. She hesitated, chewing on the inside of her cheek. "Since it got light." Daniel stopped. "You walked alone? In this cold?" She nodded, eyes flicking away like she didn't want to make a big deal out of surviving something most adults wouldn't last an hour in. That hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He rubbed his face, frustrated with a world where kids like her had to be tougher than grown, men who hid behind their money. When they finally turned onto Maple Street, the food pantry sat at the corner, dark, locked, untouched by morning activity. No lights inside, no cars, no signs of anyone coming or going. Just a small hand-painted sign that read Community Hope Center, half covered in snow. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest he didn't care for. "This where she was last night?" he asked. Mia nodded. "She always helps here." "They needed extra hands this week." Daniel crouched down, making eye-level contact, something he hadn't done with a child since before his own life got too busy. "All right. We'll figure this out. I promise." And even though he wasn't a man who tossed around promises lightly, this one came out steady, real, the kind of promise that stuck, to the cold air like steam rising from a hot mug. Then, in that quiet stretch of snow-covered morning, before anything made sense, before answers had a chance to show up, Daniel Brooks, the CEO known for staying out of everyone's business, took a deep breath, straightened his coat, and said, "Let's go find your mom." And that simple sentence, spoken on a frozen sidewalk with a scared little girl clinging to hope, was the exact moment everything in his life began to shift, without him even knowing it. The wind whipped harder the moment they stepped off Maple Street, almost like the whole town was trying to warn them they were walking straight into something bigger than either of them realized. Daniel tugged his scarf tighter, not because he was cold. He could handle a snowstorm just fine, but because he kept glancing down at Mia's little face, red and wind-burned, blinking fast like each snowflake felt like sand. "Stick close, all right?" he said, gently placing a hand over her backpack strap so she wouldn't lose her balance on the slick sidewalk. She nodded, but her breath came out shaky, the kind that told you she was tougher than she looked but running on fumes. And Daniel, who'd lived his whole life believing feelings were distractions, suddenly found himself scanning every corner like a man who wished he'd carried a blanket, a flashlight, something, anything to make this easier on her. They crossed onto Birch Lane, a narrow block where the houses looked like they were holding their breath. No porch lights, no movement. Just a long stretch of white ground broken by faint tracks from last night. Daniel paused in front of an older brick duplex with a sagging porch. "This the place?" he asked. Mia nodded and pointed toward a dim alley beside it. "Mom walked that way after the pantry." Her voice quivered. "She was carrying food for Mrs. Parker. She's real old, and sometimes she forgets to eat." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like this was normal, like kids her age were supposed to worry about elderly neighbors. Freezing made something twist hard in Daniel's chest. He muttered under his breath, "Lord, this town," then followed her down the alley, boots crunching through untouched snow. Halfway through, he heard something, just a faint metallic clank, like a door that hadn't been latched right. He stiffened. "Hold up," he whispered, noticing fresh footprints, leading toward the old apartment building at the end of the alley. The building looked tired, rusted fire escape, boarded windows, the kind of place that smelled like old carpet and forgotten rent payments. Daniel pulled his phone out, ready to call his assistant to check nearby store cameras again, when Mia tugged his sleeve. "Look," she said, pointing. There on the side of the building, a porch light flickered weak and yellow. Not fully on, not fully off, just twitching like it was trying to call for help. Daniel stepped closer, his breath slowing, senses sharp. Something happened here. Something wasn't right, and he didn't want to say it out loud. But the way Mia looked up at him, eyes wide, chin trembling, told him she already felt it too. He knelt, brushing his thumb across her sleeve to knock off some snow. "You're doing good, kiddo." "Real good, we're close." He didn't know if that was true, but it felt like the kind of thing she needed to hear to keep going. And maybe, just maybe, the kind of thing he needed to say to remember that he wasn't just some CEO in a fancy coat anymore. He was the only adult this little girl had right now. With that thought, Daniel squared his shoulders, took her hand again, and moved toward the building's entrance, where the snow had been pushed aside by someone else's footsteps not too long ago. Something was waiting for them inside, and he could feel it in the chilled air. The front door didn't shut right. Daniel pushed it gently, and it groaned open like it hadn't been oiled since the Clinton administration. Warm air drifted out just a little, just enough to say someone had been inside, but it carried that dusty, stale smell familiar to anyone who's ever walked into a hallway. where time slowed down. Mia clutched his coat sleeve, her small fingers gripping with a strength born from pure fear. "Mom, are you here?" she called softly. But her voice bounced down the stairwell like it didn't want to wake the building. Daniel placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Easy, sweetheart. We'll check every floor if we gotta." He didn't sound like a businessman now. He sounded like someone who'd made a decision. He wasn't leaving without answers. They followed the faint shuffle of footsteps imprinted in the thin layer of snow tracked inside. Down one hallway, then another. A radio hummed behind a closed door. The sound muffled some old country song about missing someone, which only added to the tension wrapping around Daniel's spine. "This place always this quiet?" he whispered. Mia shook her head. "Usually Mrs. Turner yells at her TV by now." That wasn't reassuring. They rounded another corner when Daniel spotted something that made him stop cold. A grocery bag, one of his store's bags, sat tipped over beside an apartment door. A can of chicken soup rolled lazily back and forth every time the building creaked. Mia gasped. "That's Mom's! She was bringing that for Mrs. Parker." Daniel knelt and picked up the can, brushing off a smear of frost. Definitely from last night. Definitely her mother. His pulse kicked. "All right. She's close. She has to be." He stood, knocked on the door 3 times. No answer. Knocked again, louder this time. "Mrs. Parker? You okay in there?" Still nothing. Then, just when he was about to shoulder the door open, a faint groan filtered through the wood. Not loud, not panicked. Just tired and hurting. Mia's eyes filled instantly. "Mom, that's Mom. That's her." Daniel didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed the knob, braced himself, and shoved the door open with one firm push that echoed all the way up the stairwell. Inside, the apartment was dim, warmed only by a single space heater humming in the corner. And there, on the floor beside the couch, a woman lay propped against a blanket-covered armchair, her hair messy, her face pale, her breathing shallow but steady. And beside her, sleeping under a knitted throw, was an elderly woman, bundled up and safe. Mia cried out, running forward. "Mom!" Her mother's eyes fluttered open, soft and exhausted. She whispered, "I couldn't leave her. She fell. I stayed till morning." Daniel crouched beside them, relief washing over him like warm water after a long freeze. She wasn't missing. She wasn't gone. She'd been doing what good people do, quietly helping someone who would have been forgotten otherwise. And seeing that, seeing the whole truth laid out on that worn-down carpet, made something shift inside Daniel Brooks. Something that told him this wasn't just a rescue. This was the start of something bigger. And as he reached over to help both women sit up carefully, he thought to himself, whatever happens next, we're not walking away from this. For a long second, Daniel just knelt there in that dim apartment, trying to wrap his mind around what he was seeing. Not danger, not crime, not some dramatic disappearance, like his panicked brain had suggested on the walk over. No, it was something much softer, much sadder, and somehow heavier. A single mom who'd spent the whole night caring for an elderly neighbor who had slipped, sprained her hip, and couldn't make it to a phone. No rescue crews, no family. Just this tired woman who refused to leave someone helpless in the dark. Daniel looked at her, cheeks pale, lashes stuck together from exhaustion, fingertips almost numb from the cold. And he felt this sharp ache settle in his chest. The kind of ache you get when you realize you've been blind to the quiet heroes living right under your nose. "Ma'am, you gotta tell me when you're in trouble," he whispered, his voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. She gave him a weak smile, one of those smiles that tries to say, "I'm fine," but tells the truth instead. She wasn't fine at all. Mia crawled into her mother's arms, sobbing softly, her little hands cupping her mom's cheeks, like she was scared she'd disappear again if she blinked. Her mother stroked her hair, slow, steady, a touch that told Daniel she'd done this 1,000 times, even if she was barely holding herself upright. "I didn't want to leave her," she breathed, nodding toward the older woman sleeping peacefully on the couch. "She fell. I couldn't just walk away." The way she said it made Daniel's throat tighten. She said it like it was obvious, like any decent person would stay up all night on a hardwood floor to make sure someone else made it till morning. But he knew better. Most people talked about kindness like it was a hobby. Very few practiced it when nobody was watching. And here she was, a woman who lived paycheck to paycheck, still showing the kind of heart you couldn't buy even with all the money his company brought in. He scanned the room, noticing little details he'd missed at first: the empty thermos on the table, a blanket she must have wrapped around the old woman through the night, a handwritten note the mom had tried to scribble before exhaustion forced her to stop. Every inch of this place spoke one truth. She had cared with everything she had, and she nearly paid for it. "All right," Daniel muttered, standing as determination settled across his face like armor. "We're getting you checked out. No arguments." He reached out his hand to help her up, and for the first time she didn't try to be strong. She didn't insist she was fine. She just nodded, leaning into his steady grip, her legs trembling like they'd waited too long to rest. Mia clung to her side like a shadow, wiping her eyes on her jacket sleeve. When they stepped out of the apartment, Daniel eased the door shut behind them, careful not to wake the elderly woman who was finally safe enough to sleep. As they reached the hallway, the weak morning light from the cracked window washed over them, making the snow floating in the air look almost golden. Daniel wrapped his coat around the mother's shoulders, without thinking, without hesitation. It was instinct, the kind that told her she wasn't alone anymore, not today. And for a man who prided himself on staying detached, on never getting tangled in other people's messes, the realization hit him hard. He didn't want to walk away from this family. Not now, not ever. Daniel guided them carefully through the building's front door, one hand keeping the mother steady, the other hovering behind Mia in case she slipped on the icy steps. The winter air hit them like a slap at first, but then it softened, almost like the storm itself had relaxed the moment it saw them reunited. A thin curtain of snow drifted down, slow and quiet, settling on the street in a way that made everything feel paused, like the world had decided to give them a moment to breathe. He helped the mother into the back seat of his SUV, tucking one of the emergency blankets around her legs. "You're freezing," he murmured. "We're going straight to urgent care." She tried to protest, mumbling something about missing work and needing to check on the pantry. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "Nope, not today. Your job right now is staying upright and breathing. Let me handle the rest." Mia climbed in beside her, slipping her small hand into her mother's. The kind of handhold that says, "Don't scare me like that again, even without words." Daniel shut the door gently, taking an extra second to steady himself before walking around to the driver's side. He wasn't the emotional type, at least he hadn't been for years, but something about watching that little girl hug her mother after a night of terrifying uncertainty stirred something fierce inside him. He slid behind the wheel, took one long exhale, then started the engine. The heater roared to life, warm air pouring over them. "Seatbelts," he said, glancing back with a softer smile than he'd intended. Mia clicked hers immediately. Her mother tried, but fumbled with the clasp, so Daniel leaned back and helped, hands steady even though his heart wasn't. The drive to urgent care was quiet, but not the heavy kind of quiet. More like the kind where everybody's still processing, still catching up with their own pounding pulse. Snow tapped against the windows, streetlights blurred into hazy halos, and for a few minutes the world outside didn't matter. Then halfway down Birch Lane, Mia spoke, her voice small but sure. "Thank you for finding her," she whispered. Daniel swallowed, hard. Those 5 words felt like a punch to the ribs, and not painful, just unexpected, like being hit with a truth you weren't ready for. "You don't thank me, kiddo," he replied, eyes on the road. "You're the reason we found her. You're the bravest one here." When they pulled into the clinic's parking lot, Daniel stepped out and opened the back door before either of them could move. He lifted the mother carefully like she weighed nothing, like it was the most natural thing in the world for a CEO who lived behind boardroom tables to carry a volunteer worker through a set of double doors. Inside, the nurses rushed over, guiding her to a warm exam room. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Mia grabbed Daniel's coat, holding onto it like it was the only thing keeping her steady, and Daniel placed his hand over hers, giving her the smallest nod, a promise, unspoken, but solid. Whatever this was, however deep it went, however much work this town needed, they weren't done. Not even close. And standing there in that bright, humming clinic hallway, with snow melting off his boots and responsibility, settling heavy but welcome on his shoulders. Daniel understood. One truth with perfect clarity: this wasn't the end of the storm. This was the moment he decided to walk straight into it with them. Daniel didn't plan on staying at the clinic, but something in him refused to leave. The same way a parent refuses to step out of the waiting room when it's their kid behind the curtain. So he sat there with Mia in those squeaky vinyl chairs, watching her swing her legs nervously while holding a cup of lukewarm cocoa. The nurse brought over. Outside, the snowstorm had softened to a lazy drift, the kind that makes everything look like a Christmas card even when the world is still a mess inside the walls. Every couple minutes, Mia glanced toward the hallway like she expected her mom to come walking out with a big smile and a "See? Told you I'm fine." But Daniel knew better. He knew exhaustion like this wasn't something you walk off. He'd seen adults collapse in boardrooms from nothing more than stress, and this woman had been up all night caring for someone else. When the doctor finally stepped out, wiping his hands on a paper towel, Daniel stood so fast he knocked over his coat. The doctor gave a small, tired smile. "She's okay. Dehydrated, weak, but okay. She just needs rest, food, warmth, and honestly, someone looking out for her." He didn't say it accusingly, but it hit Daniel straight in the chest anyway. He nodded, thanking the doctor, and led Mia inside the exam room. Her mother lay propped against a pillow, cheeks warm now, eyes half open with a sleepy smile that made all the fear melt right out of Mia's tiny shoulders. Mia climbed onto the bed and curled against her, whispering fast. Breathless words only kids can say after they've been scared out of their minds. Daniel stepped back, giving them space, watching the moment unfold. Like he wasn't sure he deserved to be, standing in it but couldn't make himself walk away either. And maybe it was the soft beeping of machines, or the warmth of the room, or the way her mother held her daughter like she was hugging her whole world at once, but Daniel felt a realization settle in his bones. Good people shouldn't have to scrape by alone. Not in his town. Not under his watch. He stepped outside, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he usually saved for shareholder emergencies. "We're calling a board meeting," he said. "Today." His assistant stammered, confused. But Daniel wasn't in the mood for explanations. "I don't care if they're on vacation. I don't care if they're in pajamas. Get them on a video call in 30 minutes. And tell them it concerns our entire community outreach plan." There was a long pause, then a hesitant, "Yes, sir." He hung up and stared through the clinic's frosted glass doors at the snow-covered parking lot. For years, he had run his company like a machine. Efficient, profitable, predictable. But right now, none of that felt like it mattered. What mattered was a mom who nearly froze helping someone else. What mattered was a little girl who had been brave enough to walk through a storm alone. What mattered was the undeniable truth that this town needed more than grocery, stores, and sales reports. It needed heart. And maybe, just maybe, it needed his. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Sunday morning, the little food pantry on Maple Street looked nothing like the tired building it had been before. Fresh paint covered the walls, warm yellow lights glowed through brand-new windows, and a big sign hung above the door reading, "Community Hope Center," in partnership with Brooks Markets. Inside, volunteers bustled around, laughing, stocking shelves, carrying produce crates, and serving hot meals. The place felt alive, buzzing with an energy that didn't come from money alone. It came from intention. Real intention. And in the middle of it, wearing a simple hoodie instead of his usual spotless suit, stood Daniel. His sleeves were rolled up, hands dusty from unpacking boxes, and for once, he didn't look like a CEO. He just looked like a man who finally understood what it meant to show up. When Mia and her mom walked in, everyone turned, offering warm smiles and soft waves. Her mother looked healthier, cheeks rosier, steps steady again. Mia ran straight toward Daniel, proudly holding up a drawing she'd worked on all week. 3 stick figures standing in falling snow, one tall with a messy scribble of brown hair, one medium with a ponytail, and one tiny in a purple coat. Above them, written in those wobbly little kid letters, were the words, "Thank you for finding my mom." Daniel took the picture with both hands, like it was something fragile, something priceless. "This going on my office wall," he whispered. "Front and center." Her mother watched, eyes glistening, not from sadness this time, but from the quiet shock of being seen, really seen, after years of living in the shadows of struggle. As volunteers continued their work, a reporter from the local paper snapped photos of the new center. "Mr. Brooks," she said, adjusting her camera, "what made you launch all this?" Daniel glanced at Mia, then at her mom, then at the rest of the room, bustling with people who'd needed a second chance long before he realized it. And he answered with a smile that carried both humility and certainty. "A little girl knocked on my door during a snowstorm," he said, "and she showed me exactly what needed to change." The room fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of respect, gratitude, and the shared understanding that sometimes the biggest shifts in a town start from the smallest voices. Later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting soft orange light across the street, Daniel stepped outside with Mia and her mom. Snowflakes drifted again, lazy and gentle. Mia tugged on his sleeve. "Does this mean everything's okay now?" she asked. Daniel chuckled, brushing a bit of snow from her hair. "Not everything, kiddo. But we're getting there, one step at a time." Her mother smiled softly, and for the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel like something fragile. It felt like something solid, something real. And as they walked toward the glowing windows of the newly rebuilt pantry, 3 shadows stretching across the snow, the truth settled warm and steady in Daniel's heart. Sometimes the storm doesn't end because the weather clears. Sometimes it ends because you finally decide to walk through it with someone who needs you. If this story warmed your heart today, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who still believes in quiet heroes, second chances, and small voices that can change entire towns.